Hi, this is Peter from Teach Me Maths. I'm going to walk you through DfE Test 1, and I'm not going to do all the questions. I'm basically going to give you some quick tips and tricks. Okay, but mainly I'm going to point out the common mistakes with some of the questions and a few important things to look out for. So this isn't a complete run through of the whole test. I'm not going to be looking at every question. I have got a video where I do a complete run through of DfE Test 1 on my website, www.qtsmaths.com, which is in the YouTube description below. Okay, so this is just more about avoiding common mistakes and some tricks and tips to look out for. So let's get stuck in. Okay, so question 1. Okay, I see time and time again that people look at this question and they immediately do 31 times 7. And as soon as somebody's done 31 times 7 in this question, their answer will definitely be wrong. Okay, you mustn't do 31 times 7 in this question. Okay, you should focus on the fact that it's asking about half-an-hour time slots. Okay, or half-an-hour lessons. Okay, and the best way to kind of describe this is that, you know, on an everyday basis, if you had a little slot in your diary that was 30 minutes long, okay, so in your diary this first slot was maybe 9 o'clock to 9:30. okay, what we need to do is look at how many interviews that we can do in that time slot. Okay, and that's where you do a little bit of maths. Okay, you would need to look at 30 minutes divided by 7. Okay, now if you were doing that on the calculator, you're going to get 4 point something, but of course this is question 1 in the DfE test. This is mental arithmetic. You really just need to be a bit sharp on your times tables here. You know 4 7s are 28. 5 7s is going to be too big, so it means that we can fit 4 pupils into that time slot. Okay, it doesn't matter that there's going to be 2 minutes left over. Okay, you fit 4 people into that slot, and then you fit 4 people into another time slot and 4 people into another, and you keep going until you've seen all of your pupils. Now what would actually happen here, again you need a little bit of times tables here, but if you can see that 7 of those squares filled in with a 4 would be 28. Okay, so if we kind of got 1, 2, 3, the 7th one, that would give us 28 students. Okay, so what we would do is we would pencil in the extra 3 people on the end, and that would give us 31 pupils. Okay, but the question is, how many time slots do you need? It doesn't matter in that last time slot that you only see 3 people. You still need that extra time slot. So the final answer to this question is 8. My main focus there for you guys is don't do 31 times 7. You're misunderstanding the question if you do 31 times 7 straight away. Okay? So moving on to question 3. There's a couple of important things on this page, question 3 and 4. Okay, they're nothing sort of earth-shattering, but I would say that this 25 here, I would say 25 is probably one of the most common numbers that's going to come up in your QTS, and it's one of the most important. Okay, so if I just do this question, it's probably easier for me to do this question to show you why 25 is important. Okay, so this question is a fairly straightforward fractions question. It says 22 out of 25 people achieved something. Okay, level 4 in this case. Don't worry about those parts of it. You need to get this fraction written down, and then you need to convert it, in this case, into a percentage. Okay, and the reason 25 is a very common and important number is because it goes into 100 4 times. Okay, so what I've done there is I've multiplied by 4 because 25 goes into 100 4 times. It's the reason that 0.25 is a quarter. Okay, so it's very important, and you're going to see it time and time again. Okay, so look out for the number 25. Okay, so the answer to this one would be 88%. Okay, so look out for 25s and 50s. They're probably the 2 main ones that you would make these kind of fractions super easy. Okay, and super quick. Okay, next question, question 4, the number 100. Okay, if you see the number 100, well, I say see it, obviously this would be read out to you in a test, wouldn't it? Because it's a mental arithmetic question. But if it's read out, or if you've got a paper-based version of the test, 100 is an important number, and it's a super easy number to use. Okay, so the gist of question 4 is that you just need to do, really, just bear with me, let me write that again. You really need to do 100 times 45 times 5. Okay, And that would give you the answer to this question in pence. Okay, now the shortcut here is that if you do this in a different order, if you do the 100 times 5 pence, that's 5 quid. Okay, now notice I didn't really do any math. I didn't write down 500 pence and then turn it into pounds. You could do, but it's a little bit slower. The number 100 is basically going to turn pence into pounds. Okay, so you can really cross these two numbers out. You've got 5 quid, so then you do your 5 times 45. Okay, that would be £225 in this case. Okay, so yes, you do need to do a multiplication, but you can really do one multiplication in this question if you're confident at turning pence into pounds. Okay, moving on to the next couple of questions. Question 5, there aren't really any common mistakes here other than some people just don't know how to do decimal multiplication. And unfortunately I see a lot of students, they progress with their QTS and they start learning all sorts of different things with fractions and scatter graphs in the second section, etc., etc., and they don't fundamentally get to grips with decimal multiplication. I have videos available for decimal multiplication. There's a ton of decimal multiplication videos on YouTube. Go and watch them, practice them. You can check your answers on a calculator. It's a very important topic. So I'm not going to teach you how to do that one there. There isn't really much to say about it. Question 6. This is one of your key fractions, but it's one of the ones. It's one of the ones that's probably you won't see as often as some of the others. The one that you will see most often, that's got decimals in the percentage, is this one. Okay, but if you could learn, okay, these ones, okay, and again I cover this in a bit more depth in other videos, particularly on my website. You've got very in-depth videos on there. Okay, but if you could learn these, okay, plus the next one, so 7/8 would be this one up here. Okay, if you could learn those 4, okay, again this will make the MA much quicker and easier for you. You can just recognize it. So if you look at this question, it says 87.5% passed the test. What fraction did not pass? Well, if you recognize this as 7/8, you can basically write down the answer to this, and you've probably still got 15 seconds left, and you can sit and relax and wait for the next question. Not much on this page. Questions 7 and 8. To be honest, question 8 there isn't really much to talk about there. You need to know how to do fractions of an amount, but I don't really see any particular common mistakes in there. You would just divide 165 by 5 and then times by 4. That's not very clear. That's a little bit small. That does say 4/5. So when you're doing a fraction of an amount, you divide by the bottom number and times by the top number. Okay, but just question 7, again, not really going to do this question. I'm just pointing out that look, there's 25 again. Okay, and I haven't deliberately picked DfE Test 1 so that I can pick out the number 25 regularly. It's definitely a clear thing that they're trying to get across in the DfE test, that they expect you to be able to deal with the number 25 and the number 50 quickly and easily. Okay, so again this question would be, you could write this as a fraction, so 6/25 of the week are English. Okay, so they want you to work out the percentage of lesson time per week spent on other subjects. So 2 different ways of doing that. You could either convert this to a percentage and then subtract from 100, or you could subtract the 6 from the 25 to get this fraction, and this is your other subjects. Okay, and then percentage, again you just do what we did in the earlier question. You just times top and bottom by 4. So question 9. Time and time again I see people make mistakes with these kinds of question, and they come up in the second section as well, and really it's not so much a lot of what this video is about is not so much the maths. It's about trying to get you to avoid the common mistakes. Okay, and the common mistake in question 9 is to probably just times these 2 numbers together. Okay, but the journey was 17.5 miles one way. They do seem to like to pick an amount of miles that has a half in it. Okay, and it's a one-way journey. Okay, so you have to use a bit of common sense and apply this to everyday life. If you are a teacher and you go to some training sessions okay? Everyday life in any industry, you would be allowed to claim your mileage back, okay? But your mileage isn't 17.5 miles, okay? You drive there and you drive back. So always take that amount of miles and double it, okay? So if you double 17.5, double the 17 separately, that's 34. Obviously when you double the half you get 1. 34 plus 1 is 35. And then you can think of this as this is one sort of day. You drive to the training session in the morning, you drive home in the afternoon, okay? And then the question says that you did that 6 times. So this question comes down to doing 6 times 35. If you try and do 6 times 17.5, it's a bit awkward. It's not impossible, but it's a bit awkward. If you double the 17.5 first, you'll make this question a lot easier. Okay. Question 10, there isn't a huge amount going on in that question. You can just use your fractions as normal and simplify 18 over 24. I don't see any particular common mistakes in question 10. Question 11, 0.25. So when I said to you guys earlier that 25 is one of the most important numbers in QTS, and I mentioned the fact that 25 goes into 100 4 times, and I also briefly mentioned that's why 1/4 is 0.25. Okay, so when I say 25 is an important number, it also kind of occurs in decimals like 0.25. It's the same concept. Okay, and the thing with this question is, what they would always do is they will give you one of your numbers will be easily divisible by 4. Okay, so if you start doing a decimal multiplication in this question, you're going about it in the wrong way. Okay, if you had an unlimited amount of time to do question 11, you could do what you like as long as your decimal multiplication is good. They're not trying to get you to do that. They want you to be able to do this quickly because they want you to recognize that 0.25 is a quarter. Okay, so the quick way of doing this question is you would do a quarter of 88, which is a super easy question. That's 22. Now, units would be pence, and do you remember again what I said earlier? 100, you don't need to do any maths here. 100 will turn pence into pounds. So there's the answer, 22 quid. Okay, nice and quick without doing any complicated multiplications. Okay. Right, so that's the mental arithmetic section over. Moving on to the second section where we're going to get lots of graphs and longer, sort of more wordy questions, but of course we're allowed to use calculator. But calculator does not mean that we're suddenly going to be able to get all the questions right. There are still lots of common mistakes where people don't really read the questions quite correctly, or there's some misunderstanding. So I'm going to try and point out some of those common mistakes again. Okay, now this is a little bit unclear again. These little fractions don't come up very clearly, so let's change that. That is 3/4. Okay. Now most people, when they look at box plots, they say, oh yeah, I'm okay with box plots, but there are some common mistakes surrounding the upper and lower quartiles. Now what tends to happen is people look at the number 3/4, so they automatically think that they need to be looking at the upper quartiles, which would be these green bits on, can you see me just drawing those on the upper and lower, on the upper quartiles. Okay, but just looking at the number 3/4 is not enough to tell you the correct place to look on a box plot. Okay, there's one other important thing here, and it's this. Okay, it's this word here. Okay, if this word said less, okay, it would change it entirely. So you need to look at the fraction, but you also need to look at whether it's more or less. Okay, so if you look at the box plots with my green lines on it, I'm hoping it's obvious to you that above each of those green lines is a quarter of the class. Okay, and of course when you read the question is not asking us for that. It's asking for labels that are 3/4 of the class or above a certain percentage. Okay, so because of the word more. Okay, so actually in this question, I'll just use a different color here, we actually need to be looking at the lower quartile. Okay, so it's lower quartiles here, and again hopefully you can sort of visualize this quite well. When you look at the lower quartile, you've got a quarter of the class below that point, but you've got 3/4 of the class above that point, and that's exactly what we need for this question. Okay, now when you start reading the numbers off, this one looks like about 49. Okay, this one looks about 48. This one looks like it's about 50, 51. Okay, and this one looks like it's 55. I think that's right. Yep, so this would be the answer to this question. It's test 4. Okay, but that's not the important bit. The important bit is you need to get your head round whether you're looking at the upper or the lower quartile, and just the fraction on its own is not enough to tell you that. Okay, question 16. If I've jumped from I think I've jumped from question 13 to 16. That just means that there aren't any particular quick tips and common mistakes in the questions in between. So I've jumped to question 16. This one, I do see some silly mistakes with this really, where people kind of get themselves sort of muddled up between whether they're looking at profit and loss. Okay, so if you look at this question, it's a play that's running for 2 nights. So when if a school puts on a play and they're trying to raise money for charity, you're going to get some money coming in, okay, but you're also going to have to spend some money. So you need to kind of add up the amount of money that you've spent and the amount of money that you've brought in and subtract them. Okay, but there is a quicker way of doing that with these questions. Okay, what most people would do, okay, I'm going to look at the cans of drink first. The cans of drink have been sold for 40 pence. So what most people do, they look at this and go, okay, we sold 500 cans of drink at 40p. So they do a multiplication. And of course you can do that on your calculator, so that shouldn't be an issue. And then of course they would separately do 30 pence times the 500 to work out how much they've spent on the cans. And it's just, you're just doing more work than you need to. The easiest way to do this is to look at purely the profit. Okay, so if you bought cans of drink at 30 pence and let's say you sold them for 30 pence, then the profit would be 0. You don't need to do loads of calculations. The profit would just be 0. Okay, so what you do is you look at how much extra you're selling the cans for. In this particular question, you're selling them for 10 pence each profit. So you just do 500 cans times 10 pence. Okay, and you can do the same with the tickets. The tickets are being sold at £1.50 each. Okay, but they cost 10 pence for printing. Okay, so your profit on each ticket is £1.40. Okay, so you would times by £1.40. In this particular case, it would be 500 again because there's 250 tickets, but you're running the play for 2 nights. Okay, so this gives you your profit. Once you've done that, all you've got to do is you must subtract off these two here. Don't add them on. Please don't add them on. These are costs. Okay, so it cost 50 quid for stage props, 60 quid for costumes. That's going to eat into your profits, so you need to subtract it. Okay. Okay, jump into question 17 then. Well, 17 and 18 on this page. Okay. Question 17 is a speed, distance, time question. People do struggle with speed, distance, time. I'm not going to teach you speed, distance, time in this video. I've got separate videos for that. I'm just pointing out the common mistakes. Okay, if you get good at speed, distance, time, what you don't want to do is get question 17 wrong because you didn't put the 2 rest breaks of 20 minutes in. Okay, I've seen it time and time again. I see people's answers are wrong by exactly 40 minutes. That tells me straight away that they've done the speed, distance, time bit correctly. Okay, but they didn't go back and read the question carefully and put the 2 20-minute breaks in. Okay. The other very common mistake is they look at you do the speed, distance, time, and then people tend to look at this time of 1500 and they add on whatever the amount of time is. Let's say it was 2 hours. Okay. Okay, so you would put an answer of 1700. Okay, it's an absolutely crazy answer because look, the question says, what was the latest time the pupils should set out to arrive by 1500? You're never going to arrive at 1500 if you've departed at 1700. Okay, you can't go back in time. Okay, so you must subtract the 2 hours, okay, to get 1300. Okay, so be very careful with the wording. You're either going to leave at 1500 and add the time on, or you're going to arrive at 1500 and you subtract the time off. I see it time and time again. Okay, it's a very common mistake. Okay, now I've got question 18. Let's just move this up. This is a pie chart question. There isn't really much to talk about on this one. There aren't really any common mistakes here. The most important number in this question is 29. This 29 is the total number of pupils. Sometimes they will give it to you, so you don't need to work it out yourself. But let's say it was missing, okay? It doesn't really matter what the question is. You would need to first go and add these few numbers up and get that really important number first, okay? And then you should be able to work out any proportion, okay? Just briefly on the word proportion, I get a lot of inquiries, particularly on the Facebook page that I run, okay, where people say, oh, I'm a bit confused with proportion. Just don't worry about the word proportion. Proportion is either going to be a fraction, okay, a decimal, or a percentage, okay? In this question they're asking for a decimal, so just cross out the word proportion, just don't even think about it, okay? You just get it as a decimal. Now, to get decimals and percentages, you always start with a fraction, okay? So I might as well just quickly do question 18. It says, what proportion of the class can speak 4 languages? Yellow bit, 3. It's 3 out of 29, okay? So that's what it would be as a fraction. As a decimal, you punch it into your calculator and it's a division. Make sure you do the division round the wrong way. Make sure you do it round the right way, okay? That is quite a common mistake actually, to divide numbers round the wrong way. So if you put 29 divided by 3 in your calculator, you're putting it in round the wrong way, okay? So question 19, two-way tables. I don't really see any particular common mistakes with this, other than, you know, some people just aren't very good at two-way tables and they need to put some, you know, work into to learn those. But quick tip really, the most important numbers again, a little bit like the pie chart earlier on, okay, you really need to know the total number of pupils. So when you look at geography, you've got a total of 98. 98 will go on the bottom of your fraction. In the history two-way table, okay, you're going to have 52 on the bottom of your fraction, okay? And again, it doesn't really matter whether they're asking you for fractions, decimals or percentages. You always start with a fraction, okay? So I'll just do one of these statements. The first question says, half of the pupils taking geography achieved grades B or C in mathematics. So I look at mathematics, okay, I look at grades B to C, and I go along to the total. It's 49. So there you go, I put 49 at the top of my fraction. If you stick that in a calculator, it'll tell you it's 0.5, and 0.5 is the same as a half, so this would be a true statement. But I just wanted to illustrate how I would use the fraction, and the 98 will be involved in every part of, or in every question for geography, and 52 would be involved in every question for history. Okay? Okay, so question 20 then. Not a huge amount of common mistakes in this, but I think it's a question it's worth spending 20 or 30 seconds on it just to give you some quick tips, okay? You don't need this column, okay? You don't need this column. You don't need this column, and you don't need this column. So there you go. That's made the question a lot easier straight away. You're only looking at the word improvement, okay? So if we just take pupil A as an example, okay? This pupil is 6 months ahead of their actual age in terms of reading. So you can, and if you look at in the column, okay, see, somebody's basically worked that out for you. Okay, if your actual age is 5 years and 9 months, and your reading age is 6 years 3 months, you're 6 months ahead. But you don't need to look at those columns; it tells you that there. Okay, and that's in March. Okay, and then a little bit later on in June, they measure it again, and this person, okay, has improved their reading even more. Okay, by how much? Well, by 13 take away 7. Okay, so that, and of course you've got calculator, it's second section, question 20. So you look at this and you can go down the columns and just do 13 take away 6, 17 take away 13, 5 take away 8. So that's an interesting one. Pupil C, if you're doing 5 take away 8, okay, that's actually -3. That means that pupil has then they've not improved their reading. It's gone sort of backwards by 3 months. Okay, they're still a good reader, but it's not. They haven't made an improvement. Okay, so you must be careful to get negative numbers here. Okay, now if you carry that on down, okay, the ones that do tend to confuse people, and I'll just do it in a different color to illustrate. Let's use this one down here. Okay. You need to be a bit careful with this one. Okay, if you use the method that I've just suggested, you would be doing -3 minus -9. Now that is correct, okay, and you would get an answer of 6, but you guys aren't particularly used to doing negative numbers in QTS. QTS negative numbers, it doesn't come up that much, if I'm honest with you. Okay, now the best way to illustrate really what's going on there, okay, would be to draw a number line. And number lines are pretty useful for quite a few things in QTS. And if we look at pupil I, they were 9 months behind their reading age, okay, and now they're 3 months behind their reading age. So what you need to do is visualize this number line and think, how many places do you need to move from -9 to get to -3? Okay, and it's 6. Okay, it's a little bit like a thermometer as well. If it was -9 degrees, okay, and then it went to -3 degrees, it's warmed up by 6 degrees. Okay, and there are some questions in QTS surrounding that. I think there is a specific temperature question like that. Okay, you can use a number line and then it's fairly easy to visualize it. Okay, so that should be a useful little tip. Okay, so we've got question 22 of DfE Test 1 now. Okay, right, sorry, I'm trying to get rid of that. That's better. Okay, right. Now, it's a cumulative frequency graph, but what's a little bit different about this cumulative frequency graph is the labeling for the grades. Okay, so it says C and below here. Even if that said just C, okay, because it's a cumulative frequency graph, okay, then these points would mean C and below, okay, because that's how cumulative frequency works, okay. So I don't particularly like these questions, and it confuses people that start getting used to cumulative frequency, and then they see these ones and get confused, okay. So it is actually just a straightforward cumulative frequency graph. The bit that confuses people is that on the graph it's saying things like C and below, B and below, okay, and the question wants us to find out how many people achieved a grade C and above. So there's a different word in there, it's C and above. Okay, so what most people will do, okay, is that they would go to this value here and look it up, and it's definitely the wrong thing to do. And the best way for me to show you that is literally to just write out the grades in a little list. Okay, so just bear with me while I do that. So A star down to, in this particular case, they've got a G and then they've got a U. Okay, now if you focus on this question here, okay, it says grade C and above. So I'm going to section those people off separately, okay, and section everybody else off separately. Now the question is percentage, okay, so what should be fairly obvious to you guys is that these two blocks are going to add up to 100%, okay. Now you cannot look up on the graph how many people got C and above, but you can look up how many people got D and below. Okay, that's what this box over here is, D and below. Okay, so I go to the graph. Okay, we're looking at predicted, so that's the blue graph. So I go up from D and below onto the blue bit. I know this is a little bit small, don't worry too much about that. Okay, it's the method that's important. Okay, so it's actually 60%, so we can label this little section as 60%. I'm hoping you guys will find that obvious now, that this must be 40%, and that would be our answer. Okay, I would actually recommend you write out the grades A star through to U and section it off like this, and I think you'll find it a lot easier. It'll make sense to you as you're doing it, and you've got the time in the second section to do that. Okay, moving on to question 23. We've got a fairly simple scatter graph, okay, and any of you that have, if you're just starting out and this is the first test that you've looked at, you won't be sort of familiar with all the different types of questions yet, okay, but if you've done a few other tests and you're watching this video, you will have seen some scatter graphs that have a line on them, and I'm just going to draw that line in now. Okay, there you go, that green line that I've just added onto the scatter graph. Okay, and a very important thing for you guys to understand when you see that line on these graphs is you need to understand what it means. Okay, lots of people look at it and think it's some sort of line of best fit, and it isn't. Okay, it's very specifically a line that goes through numbers that are the same. So when you look at the two axes, okay, if you look at, say, this point here, okay, it goes through 10, 10. It also goes through 30, 30 and 50, 50. Okay, and what it helps and I can imagine teachers using this in school. If you've got a bunch of pupils that are all above the line, that means that they're, well, I'm going to give you a slightly different example. Let's say that one of the axes is paper 1 and one of the axes is paper 2. If you've got everybody above the line, that means that they maybe did better in paper 1 than paper 2, or vice versa if they were all below the line. So it kind of helps you split the class in different ways. Okay, for this particular question, okay, we're actually only looking for a point that lies on the line. Can you see that it says click on the correct letter for the school which had the same result in both years? Okay, it's G. Okay, so the answer to this question would be G. Now, the slight problem you guys have got is you're obviously not going to be able to draw that line in the real test, okay, but you can visualize it. If you kind of get used to looking at that, it will help you visualize and try and find the one that is exactly on the line. Okay, and you can see that G, if you read off the two values, they're the same, 34 and 34. Okay, I don't like this question because there's quite a few points that are very close to being on the line. If you look at E, D, C, A, G, they're all very close to the line. I don't like this question. Okay. Right, question 24. The maths involved in question 24 is super simple, particularly as it's in the calculator section. Okay, the common mistakes are people not reading the question carefully. Okay, now you just really probably have to go through this in order. Okay, we've got a 3. Okay, and then we've got 28 pupils in each of those classes. Okay, so we would do that. Okay, and then, but then it says the pupils worked in pairs. Okay, so if they worked in pairs, instead of having 84 experiments, we're going to have half of that, so you would now divide that by 2. Okay, so we've got 42 experiments. Okay, and you're going to use 10 cubic centimeters of, what is it in this case? It's acid. Okay, so simple times 10. Okay, so we're at 420 so far, and then you just have to keep reading the question carefully. The next sentence says that each pair repeat the experiment, so you double that number. Okay, but that's still not the end of the question. Oh yes, it is. Sorry. It says then, what was the minimum number of cubic centimeters of acid from the laboratory technician for 3 classes? So that is the final answer. Okay, but they could put an extra bit in this sentence, so you just need to read that sentence carefully. Okay, and then what you do is, after you've got this answer of 840, go through it one more time. Start at the beginning and make sure you haven't missed a number. And it's not all just about numbers. Okay, this bit here, that it's words that tell you that you need to double it, but it says each pair repeated the experiment, so it's the words repeated experiment that means you double it. Okay, so you can't just go and look at the numbers. If you literally just sort of skim read it and take the 3 and the 28 and the 10 out, you could make a mistake in these questions. Okay, you've got to look at the words. The pupils were paired, okay, and then they repeated it, which kind of does cancel things out in this particular question. Okay, but the common mistakes with these are just not reading the question carefully and missing something. Okay, so moving on to question 26, we're very nearly finished now. Okay, this particular question, it's fairly straightforward, to be honest. What's the common mistakes here? I think I ought to just point out that, and it's probably obvious to most of you, but you just need to subtract these two numbers to find out how many miles the minibus or whatever vehicle they're using has done. Okay, and then really the rest of it's fairly straightforward, but I have seen people make mistakes with, or even I've had people ask me what the word surplus means. Okay, it's not a word that we use in everyday life that often, but be careful with this question and any similar questions. I do think the correct answer to this question is £1.50, and I must admit I can't remember whether it is a loss or a surplus, but it doesn't really matter. It's kind of like whichever it is, you've got to get your head around it, because just getting the answer of £1.50, there's kind of 2 correct answers that it could be. Okay, so you need to look at whether the teacher has charged the pupils too much or too little. Okay, and then that'll tell you whether it's a loss or a surplus. Okay, question 28, last one. Okay, not a huge amount to talk about in this question, but there's a couple of little things to point out. Okay, this is very important. Okay, it's very tempting with these kinds of questions, particularly on question 28. You might only have a couple of minutes left in the test, so you're under a bit of time pressure. Okay, it's tempting to just go and look at the graph and try and answer the questions, but you do need to know how many lessons are involved here. Okay, because these numbers down here are all percentages. Okay, it says that pretty clearly in several places, percentages. Okay, so you need to know how many lessons there are, so try not to miss that number. Okay, the other thing that I just wanted to briefly mention was this ratio here. This is probably the most common thing that I would see people maybe struggle with or get wrong. Ratios simplify in the same way that a fraction does. Okay, so I'm actually going to do this third statement. So we need good stroke very good, okay, in year 6. Okay, so that's the blue one, so that's a 45. Okay, and that goes on the left, and then it says unsatisfactory stroke poor, which is the grey one, again in year 6, that's a 5. So you write your ratio like that. Okay, now in terms of simplifying that, it simplifies in exactly the same way that you would a fraction. As long as you do the same to both sides of the ratio, you can simplify it. So in this particular case, if you divide both of them by 5, you would get this ratio of 9 to 1. So you can see that this would be a false statement. Okay, so yeah, definitely not 5 to 1. Okay, that's it really. Okay, don't worry about simplifying ratios. They're just the same as simplifying fractions. Okay, best of luck. If you need any more help with this, as I say, I've done a complete run through of DfE tests 1 to 4, and those videos are on my website, and you will be able to find the details for that in the description below the video. Okay, best of luck. Thanks a lot.